please, have a seat. Sorry, I told the media I'd take a few questions. I forgot about that. So, I would like to start with the local press, and if we've got a little time, I'll take some questions for the national pool after that. Local press, fire away.
Vice President Vance, Grace Blanchard, ABC 7 and Fox 22 News here in Bangor. On the topic of fraud, just a few months ago, you were across the river in Bangor addressing fraud concerns and expressing an openness to work with the Mills administration. Can you speak on any progress that has been made since then in terms of regarding cooperation between the Trump administration, the fraud task force, and the Mills administration?
Well, what I said back in Bangor a few months ago, and I'll repeat it here today, is we don't want the anti-fraud issue to become partisan. We really don't. Democrat, Republican, or independent, whoever you voted for president in 2024, you should be standing behind the principle that the hard-earned tax dollars of the people in this room ought to go to what they paid for, not to the fraudsters. That's simple. So we've reached out to the governor, to the attorney general. We've gotten, some people in their office have been responsive, but I hate to say it, that after a few months of working with these guys, I don't have a great amount of confidence that they're going to lean into this anti-fraud effort. And I think the problem is that their incompetence or their something worse is one of the reasons why Maine has become such a capital of fraud, and particularly it's a lot of healthcare fraud. You think about this, the two big federal programs, Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare is the program that you paid into if you're an elderly American for your entire life to ensure that you've got good health care on retirement. Medicaid is the program that ensures that our low-income Mainers and low-income folks across the country have access to basic medicine. And I like that. I don't want a kid who can't afford to go see a doctor to suffer. We say in the United States of America, we're going to take care of our fellow citizens when they're down on their luck. And that's a good and amazing and generous thing. What do you see? You see fraudsters taking advantage of those programs. You see people saying that they're providing health care services, collecting a whole lot of money, but not doing a single bit of health care. It's got to stop. And what I'd say to the governor and the attorney general of this state, we continue to have open arms. Come and work with us. Fight against the fraud. Fight for your own people. We'd love to work with you.
Rachel from the Portland Press-Herald. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the negotiations over the tariffs with Canada, and particularly what might you say to businesses and consumers that are worried about the impacts of those tariffs and how those negotiations are going?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd say we're very mindful of the fact that Maine is a border state with Canada. There's a lot of cross-border transaction between Maine and Canada. And what we're trying to do here is just make sure that Maine actually gets a fair deal. If you look at the amount of tariffs that have been applied, not just on Maine, but on a lot of our northern states that are doing cross-border trade with Canada, Canada and China have been the two worst countries when it comes to trade policy anywhere in the world. What a shame that is. China, you of course expect. They're our biggest economic competitor. I would expect that from China. I would not expect that from Canada. We have to remember, Canada is a state, sorry, Freudian slip. That was actually an accident. Canada is a country that has underinvested in its military that quite literally would get invaded by a foreign country were it not for the umbrella of protection provided by the United States of America. And so how does Canada actually respond to that? By treating the people of Maine fairly? No. They apply ridiculous tariffs and other non-tariff duties on Maine products coming into Canada, and they don't expect Maine or anybody else to fight back. We're sick of that. We are actually going to fight back against unfair trade practices, whether it's coming from China or Canada. Now, and let me just give you a very, very simple and concrete example. If you buy dairy, cheese, butter, milk that comes from Canada into Maine, you probably are buying a product that has 0% tariffs on it, okay? And by the way, if Canada applied 0%, that would be one thing. But if a Maine farmer sends dairy products into Canada, they could be paying as much as a 250% tariff. Now, how is it fair to the farmers of Maine that they pay 250% when the Canadian farmers pay nothing. That unfairness is something that we just have to fix. And here's what happened with the most recent round of negotiations. They're still ongoing, and I want to be respectful of the process. But we know that Canada allows itself to be used as a backdoor for Chinese goods. They treat Chinese goods more fairly than they do the goods that come from the people of Maine. It's insanity. And what we've said to Canada is stop it. Apply a basic principle of fairness to the trade that you're doing between North Dakota and Canada, between Maine and Canada. And what happened at the very end is they came in with a bunch of unreasonable last-minute demands. I frankly thought we had a deal. I think that we should have a deal, but I think that we need to send a message loud and clear to the Prime Minister of Canada. Stop taking advantage of the people of Maine. Stop taking advantage of America. It's over. We expect fairness in our trade policy. I'll take a question from this gentleman up front. Well, I appreciate that question. The question was, how do we ensure accountability for the people who have committed fraud? And I do know that the Maine Wire and Paul LePage and really everybody who is a patriot in this community has been on top of the fraud issue, frankly, well before I was. Paul LePage has been the biggest advocate in state or federal government anywhere in the state of Maine at protecting your tax dollars and protecting these programs. It's one of the reasons why we got to get Paul LePage to Congress. I need the help, ladies and gentlemen. You got to send Paul to help me. But the two big things that we have to do to ensure that there is real accountability. Number one is when somebody commits fraud, they've got to go to prison and we've got to prosecute them. And that's what we've been doing. If you look at the number of anti-fraud prosecutions you've already seen, but also at a new, we set up a special position within the Department of Justice, an anti-fraud guy within a deputy attorney general who's just going after fraud. That's his 100% day-to-day job, and we've massively ramped up the prosecutions. The second thing you got to do, and this was shocking to me when I started this work, is that if you had low-level fraud in the United States of America, we would largely, it wasn't an official policy, but if you committed fraud of, let's say, $1 million, the federal government would just look the other way. Isn't that crazy? So what we've done is we've said no fraud is too small. If you are defrauding the American taxpayer, we're going to do everything that we can to put you in prison and send a message to the other fraudsters. The gig is up. Commit fraud against America and go to jail. Let's do one more.
Jackie Mundray, I work at WMTW, the ABC station in Portland, Maine. You touched on immigration a little bit, and I know immigration enforcement has been a priority of the Trump administration. I'm sure you're also aware there was a fatal shooting at the hands of an immigration agent in Biddeford 6 weeks ago. Last week, there was a shadow hearing with Democrats that say the Trump administration is not investigating this shooting. Where are we on that investigation that happened in Biddeford 6 weeks ago?
Well, first of all, that's not true. There was a shooting, as you mentioned, about 6 weeks ago. And of course, the Trump administration, our Department of Justice, everybody investigates this stuff because we want everybody, whether they're political friends or not, everybody has to follow the law in the United States of America. It's that simple. Now, in that particular case, I don't want to comment on, I want to prejudge all of the details. But look, when you have a law enforcement action, when you have somebody who is committing a crime in the United States of America, and you go and arrest that person. Now, I believe the person who was shot was not part of the underlying investigation, but when the officers approached the person they were trying to arrest, that person, drove away from the scene, and what at least the law enforcement officers argue is that that person posed a danger to the community. Again, I'm not going to prejudge the case, because I think everybody is entitled to their case, not in the court of public opinion, but a court trial by their juries, an actual real investigation, if that's what ultimately happens. Everybody is entitled to understand what's going on, whether what they're being accused of is actually legitimate, and ultimately, of course, if there is a criminal prosecution, then they're entitled to a jury by their peers. But when I look at that case, what I see is inevitably a country that is trying to enforce its laws, and that hasn't for a long time. And while Democrats get extremely agitated about this case, again, we're investigating that case. They're being dishonest if they say that we're not investigating that case. But what I see from Democrats is people who are far more worried about a shooting involving an illegal alien than they are about the fact that tens of thousands of Mainers died from fentanyl overdoses by that poison brought into our community. And so my message to the Democrats who are so worried about that situation is to say, have a little bit of perspective. We can absolutely investigate every shooting, and we will, but we can also secure our border and ensure that that poison stops coming into our country, and that is our priority, and that's our emphasis. Now, we're going to hit the road here, so let me just say one final thing, and then I guess it's Monday. Tomorrow is my 6-year-old, his first day at kindergarten, so we're very excited about that. I have some kids here who looks like they're not excited to get back to school, but let me just say that, even though I grew up in a different part of the country, I have a certain feeling of camaraderie with communities like this one because I grew up in a town, a steel mill town, where everybody said it was the town of the past. People just accepted that the steel mill jobs were going away, that all of my buddies' dads would have to lose their jobs, that my papaw would lose his job, and that that's just the way that it was. And I remember growing up and remember how many people, how many grandparents and parents said to their kids that if you want a future, you're going to have to go somewhere else. You're going to have to go off to school somewhere else. You're going to have to find a career somewhere else. You're going to have to get job training somewhere else. And I remember thinking to myself, how heartbreaking is it for a mom or a dad or a grandpa or a grandma to invest in this community, to love this community, to raise their kids in this community, but to not believe that there is any opportunity in the future in this community that they love. And that's one of the things, it's one of the reasons why we love Compotech. It's one of the reasons why we're trying to invest and reinvest in communities all across the state of Maine. Because I don't want you to look at your own community as something that needs to be left behind. I want you to recognize that there is a great American future for your children, for your grandchildren, for your entire family, right here in Brewer, Maine, right here in the state that you all love. So when you ask yourself, why do we do what we're doing? It's not just because we want jobs. Of course we want that. Of course we want dignified wages. We want good health care benefits for everybody. Why we're doing what we're doing is because we know that the future of America cannot be rebuilt if we write off certain communities or leave certain communities behind. So my message to you, my message from Paula Page is the future is right here in Maine, so long as we're willing to fight for it. I'll stand by your side. Fight along with me. God bless you guys, and good to see you.